Hello, Robs. We're back for part 3 of Una Jeffers and part 10 of the Jeffers extravaganza, Robs. Where did we leave off? I would say there. Well, look at that. I never noticed that. Economy or moderation of any sort were unknown traits to a native-born Californian. We grew up throwing away our possessions with prodigal and to the four winds, never doubting for one moment that the four winds would replenish us in due time. One night I committed an unforgivable sin. In clearing away the dishes, I thoughtlessly threw a rind of cheese into the fire. The next day, Una was busily preparing some macaroni for our dinner. She began to open and shut the cupboard doors, frantically searching for something. Exasperated, she turned and said, "Edith, did you or Robin do anything with the piece of cheese that was left last night?" I glanced at Robin apprehensively. I could tell by the subdued laughter in his eyes that he was aware of my guilt. I trembled. I longed for the floor to open up so that I could disappear just long enough to return with the new piece of cheese. Una stood before me, waiting for an answer. I managed after 2 attempts to tell her I had thrown it away and how sorry I was. "Never mind, we'll just have to have the macaroni without cheese," she said sternly. "It's too bad because there was just enough left to make it perfectly delicious." Even now I watch them at Torhouse gather up with almost superstitious care all discarded crumbs to spread in the country yard for the birds. It used to be such fun to watch Una out on the fisherman's wharf at Monterey. She would stand and wait most patiently while the men started to unload their catches. Oh no. As the net, brimful of silver fish, would swing up from the boat and down onto the wharf, Una would see the exact fish she wanted and dart over and grab hold of its tail and hang on to it until one of the laughing fishermen would disentangle it for her. Then she would bargain for it. Una knew exactly how much a fish should cost. She might concede the fact that a salmon cost a trifle more than some fat sea bass, but they couldn't and didn't dream of overcharging her. After this, we would drive out to some nearby ranch and get fresh berries and eggs, then home, and Una would cook the fish or the pot roast superbly. But there was invariably one most important place to stop before we left Monterey: the old adobe wine shop. The Italian and his wife who owned the place used to sprinkle the bare, unpainted floor with water to keep it cool. Robin would take a huge wicker-covered demijohn inside and get it filled with Angelica wine. No one drank before dinner, always afterwards. After the dishes were washed, Una or Robin would fill great tumblers with the wine, and we would sit by the fire and sip it while Robin read aloud to us. He always read Shelley in those days, and occasionally Swinburne or even Maeterlinck. Una gave me many books to read, and the one she loved most. There were Yeats and Moore, Arthur Symons Pater, the Brontes, Dostoevsky and Hardy, and D'Annunzio's The Flame of Life, and innumerable volumes of Irish legends. Una turned to me one day with a well-thumbed copy of Wordsworth in her hands and said, "Poetry, Edith, bears great fruit for living. Poetry is first, last, and all the time, for in it you will find something that is nowhere else in literature." She confided to me with a grin that her high school graduating oration had been entitled "The Poet." It was very flowery. I looked quite sweet and enthusiastic when I delivered it. Wish Robin had seen me. The following year, Una was again expecting the arrival of another child. Again, they made a trip south so that Dr. Coffey could officiate. Instead of one child, Una produced twin boys, Garth and Donnan. Una told me afterwards that they came so fast she didn't have an anesthetic. The doctor said, "Here is son, Una." She laughed when she spoke of this incident. I sank back, thrilled to death. At last I had a son. But no sooner did I start to relax when Dr. Coffee said, "Here is another boy." There was no doubt about it, for he showed it to me, and so I was forced to believe him. Then he began to be very efficient once again, to tease me. When the afterbirth came, he said, "Una, triplets." That was too much to endure. I sat halfway up on the delivery table and roared at him. There couldn't be a third. He and all the nurses laughed at my indignant protest, but I was never so happy in all my life as when I realized I had given birth to twin boys. Of course, no visitors were permitted to see Una for a week. When I finally tiptoed into that hospital room, she looked more like a Madonna than ever. With her long braids outside the white spread, Robin, great tall Robin, was standing by the bed, staring down at his two lively, lusty sons. There was an expression of incredulous wonder and worship on his face as he watched Una's radiance. He called her Little Apple Blossom. When she was permitted to leave the hospital, Robin took his little family over to his mother's home in Pasadena. The day I went to see them there, Robin greeted me in the hallway. "Have you come to see the feast?" "They're upstairs." I went up into Una's room. She had just finished bathing and rubbing the twins with oil. She looked pale, with dark circles under her eyes. It worried me. I wondered if she had the necessary strength to undertake all of these duties besides nursing her infant sons. But Una's fierce love was a possessive one. She wanted to do everything for her babies herself. She scoffed at the idea of a nurse. Her greatest joy in life was to be with her two sons and with Robin. Una wrote me a letter long afterwards when she was back in Carmel and I was south. I nursed the twins for 10 months, and apparently I'm the only woman in history who ever did. The little Jeffers family came back to Carmel by the sea and moved out of the log cabin into a larger, sunnier house. This second house was a brown-shingled bungalow, the Trethaway house, later owned by Tom Gator, a typical Carmel house paneled inside with redwood. They lived there for more than 2 years. I hate to lay this book flat, but I also hate not to lay it flat. They lived there for more than 2 years. I visited them often in this house. The days were very busy and planned around the twins' schedule. After the babies were safely tucked away, we would drink our coffee by the fire. Later, the big wicker-cased demijohn of wine was brought out and Robin read to us. Una was making the little smocks that the boys wore for several years. They were always of the same amber-colored linen, a single brown butterfly embroidered on garse, a swallow on downings. Sometimes Una and Robin asked me to dance, and I would improvise, either to interpret a mood or simply variations of rhythmical themes based on Mrs. Hovey's methods. Una thought these very beautiful. I remember one morning she wrote down copious notes and said, "Now if I can just get the boys raised, I am going to do these and be very beautiful too." There came a day when two of my friends from Hawaii arrived to see Edith's matchless Carmel. One was Edith Williams, called Kulumanu, of the Castle family, long important in island affairs, sister of the beautiful and fabulous Claire Cartwright. The other was Abby Buchanan, in whose veins flowed a rich strain of royal Hawaiian blood. She was fascinating and exotic. A mysterious cloud hung over her, for an island girl had put a curse on her after Abby had won some native prize for dancing. Her health had become frail, and she did in fact die young a few years later. One evening we went to the Jeffers' house carrying hula skirts and various lovely colored scarves and chiffons. There was a long living room with a corner window seat at one end. The moon was full that night. It filled those windows, and in its glow sat Una, of course, gay and vibrant in a brilliant flame-colored sari I had wrapped around her, and Robin with a lee of ferns. We insisted that everyone must be festive at a native dance. Already we had filled the room with flowers and green branches. The Hawaiian dances fascinated me, and I worked hard to learn the bula. some of the ritualistic movements of the ceremonial dances from the Kulumanu, whom I first met at Denishon. He danced before our friends to the music of our Hawaiian phonograph records. Una clapped her hands with the beat of the drums and was completely delighted with the suppleness of Abby's lovely body when she bent backward to pick a scarf from the ground with her teeth. We grew more and more excited as the evening wore on. It was only when very late, very early in the morning, wails began to come from the twins' room that we piled hula skirts and the other props in a corner and slipped away through the forest shadow to our cabin. Later, Una and Robin bought a beautiful piece of property out on the point with the sea beneath them, and Point Lobos forever, a part of their new world. When they were building their house out on the point, Robin planted 2,000 eucalyptus and cypress trees. Of them, he writes, and beyond them, the jets of young trees I planted the year of the Versailles peace. All right. I think I lost the page here. No, I did not. Today, the branches meet overhead as you walk the back path to the house, like an arch of drawn sabers at an army wedding. A builder in Carmel called Murphy built the first part of the Jeffers house. His wife had had twins, so she loaned Una her twin baby buggy. I came up more and more often to visit Una in Tor House. I would bring a few little gifts with me. It was such fun to see Una's delight over the simplest thing. She has tiny feet, size 2. That is pretty small. It was difficult for her to get grown-up shoes that small, so she compromised and wore little girl patent leather slippers, the kind Alice in Wonderland always wore. Una admired the sandals I wore when I was studying at Denishon, so to surprise her I had some made, little white leather ones. I think she liked those more than any other gift I ever gave her. People invariably give Una things. She is so generous with herself, so outgoing in her warmth. When she is a friend, one has a desire to make her happy. Since Una has such definite hobbies, it is so easy to search for the thing you know she will adore. Unicorns and George Moore, garnets and aquamarines, honey and asphodel bulbs from Hymettus, sandalwood perfume, Fortuny gowns, Jugtown pottery, Irish whiskey, melodeons, and Gaelic music. I'm sure if you should bring Una the right songs from the heart of Ireland, you would forever win a place in her heart. And books and rocks from the graves of poets or from the round towers of Ireland. Even a stone. Oh no. Look at my arm for a minute. Even a stone Croag Patrick, a holy mountain in County Mayo, or the Temple of Heaven in China, any rock sacred for some memory, Una loves because Robin builds them into her tower, and she has great fun pointing them out to visitors and telling strange stories to match their origin. Oh yes, Una loves Madonnas and has the most beautiful one in a specially built niche in her little tower room. She is Spanish and very old, dressed in ancient brocades, a maroon and black. Her face is made of delicately colored wax, her eyes of glass. What poignant sadness and gentle dignity in that little figure. Over the niche printed in gold letters on the stone is Madonna della Torre, and at her feet a medal Una found in the cathedral in Milan and a rosary. Poor little rosary Una picked up at the floor of the round tower in Kells, Ireland. In humorous contrast to so many of the fragile, beautiful things Una loves are epitaphs, and Billy, their ugly, handsome English bull. But the story about Billy's death comes later. Every morning at Tor House started exactly the same way. Una never once deviated from her daily ritual. Very early, she would jump out of bed and light the airtight heater to make the room warm up quickly for the twins. Then Una would take a cold bath. For some reason, she thought this was an important thing to do. She would roar like a lion all the time she was taking it. I used to wake up in my room and start laughing at her self-torture. The next move was to get a huge bowl of cornflakes and milk and 3 spoons, and Una's voice saying, 1 for Garth, 1 for Donna, and 1 for Mother. Meanwhile, Robin made the coffee. After this, the twins' bath. That was a tumultuous event. After this, Una would make Robin's breakfast. When breakfast was finished, the twins were put outside in a little pen to play while Una made the beds, swept, washed the breakfast dishes, and several times a week washed the clothes for the family. I happened to be there on a visit when Dr. Coffee came up from Los Angeles to see how the twins were doing. He said, "They're too white, Una." Instantly, Una was panic-stricken, hurling questions at Dr. Coffee about what should be done. He said scraped beef and spinach put through a sieve. This meant extra tedious work, but of course Una did it, and did it most expertly. Young Donnan wouldn't eat his. He would just hold the food in his mouth, disdaining another spoonful. Una grew more and more frantic. One day when she was worn out, she suddenly lost her temper. She screamed at Donnan, "Eat your food!" Robin made one start across the room, then stopped. He realized it was her problem, and it was best to let her cope with it alone. He just came and stood by poor Una. She spanked Donnan, and Garth cried because Donnan was howling. Then they both got sick and lost their food, and Una wept bitterly. But that was the last time Donnan refused to swallow his spinach and scraped beef. I used to marvel at Una's endless activities. They were simply overwhelming. She made the boys' moccasins by hand, God knows how many dozens of pairs, and she made their clothes and Robin's shirts. As they commenced to wear out, she mended and darned them, and broke in sleep at night, jumping up 2 or 3 times to take the twins to the bathroom. And the wondrous thing about it all was Una's joy in doing these things. At night, when the boys were asleep, Una would sit by the fire and unbraid her beautiful hair and brush it, while Robin read about aloud. Suddenly, she looked like a little girl, wistful, adorably appealing, sitting there with tiny bare feet. Una said so many thrilling things happened all the time. She hated to go away from home for a day even. She spoke of the great meteor that made an arc of flaming green and blue over Tor House into the sea, the ship loaded with a cargo of paper that they watched burning from dawn to midnight, drifting along the horizon off Carmel Bay. The mysterious lights that flashed from rocks and sea during the days of prohibition smuggling, and there was a car that dashed over the cliff late one night. It landed upside down, broken and twisted, but its lights still burned. Una and Robin ran down to help. Its occupant had vanished. Only a desperate-looking shoe stuck out from the underneath, but no foot in it, she adds earnestly. And they have had many queer visitors by day and by night, with odd requests. One day Una saw a pretty elfish girl in the courtyard, bending over a rosemary bush. "Perhaps you didn't know," the girl explained, with the strong Highland Scotch accent. "I own a bit of this and land here, for I slid in one day last summer and buried a crooked sixpence." One of the most exciting episodes was when they watched a midnight meeting of the Ku Klux Klan near the standing stone at the north boundary of Tor House property, just where it joins Custer's land. White-robed figures moved ceremoniously and burned a fiery cross. Una chuckled through the binoculars, watching the initiates bow to their leader. The Rosicrucian order is said to have owned the land about that stone long ago, and perhaps lifted there at certain times their rosy cross, the ancient symbol of their order. And there have always been exciting observations of birds. Once an incredible flock of shearwaters streamed past like a black flood all of one day. Again, there was the beauty of sun flashing on the snowy wings of 21 wild swans early one morning. Una reported, "Andrew Stewart says thousands of wild swans flew over in the old days. They would often alight in the water meadow or even come into the barnyard to pick up grain. Even yesterday, Una and Robin saw a white heron in their cypress grove." These are some of the happenings that marked the happy hours at Tor House. Ella Young, the Irish poet and folklorist, often came to Tor House in former years. She was a lovely, ethereal person whose daily companions were the spirits of earth and air. One afternoon she had gone with Una and a passing visitor to Una's tower room, and then to the top of the turret. They were watching a ship rounding Point Lobos when they heard 2 sweet chords of music several times repeated. The visitor said Robinson Jeffers must be playing the little organ, unaware how impossible a suggestion that was. Ella, veil and wrapped like a druidess, said casually, "I often hear fairy music among the stones around this place." Una knows of no other explanation. It seems so paradoxical a thing to say a poet has no ear for music when such a poet as Robin makes rare music with his words. But it is true of him nevertheless, as of Yeats, who his sister said couldn't carry a tune. Yet when Una plays one of her melodies in the candlelight, filling the room with the haunting Gaelic music, Robin is always pleased. I thought he said he hated music. I sometimes wonder if he hears or if he is only loving Una through his eyes as she sings. He's probably enduring with that wine. Recently, when the twins were home for a holiday from college, Una went to the organ and played some ancient Irish music for them, which a friend had just sent her. Robin turned to Garth, smiling. Don't you think that is a little better than your hillbilly music? Garth said, when we were little and Mother played away on the organ in the attic while we were going to sleep, I never could tell whether it was the wind I was hearing or Mother and the organ. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. There is something continuously inspirational about Una's household. What is there, of course, is a harmony of home and family of an almost incredible perfection. She manages to make the routine of life an endless adventure. During all the years Una has been married to Robin, she has never had a servant, preferring to use that money for other things, for buying more land around their beautiful place, for trips to Ireland, for the boys' college. But hearing that old Fi, her little seamstress, was on the verge of losing her eyesight, Una invited her up to Carmel, thinking the change would be beneficial and she could feel useful helping with housework and babies. Fi, as everyone called her, acted like one demented. She made strange faces when referring to this here Caramel, completely convinced that Carmel was a Mad Hatter's village entirely lacking insanity of any kind. Fi greatly admired Una, but she had known her in the early days when she lived a totally different sort of life with Edward. To say that the dear old lady was bewildered and skeptical about Robin is putting it mildly. She thought him unbelievably strange, and when he sat up until 4 or 5 in the morning writing poetry with a huge goblet of Angelica wine within reach, her wildest fears were obviously justified. An amusing incident occurred one night when Robin, after hours of work, reached for his glass and found it empty. Since Una had put the demijohn of wine away in the closet of her bedroom, Robin went in to get it, not wishing to waken Una by lighting a lamp. Robin tiptoed into the dark room. As luck would have it, he bumped into a chair and knocked it over. It made a terrific crash. And of course, poor Fi wakened and lay shuddering and shaking in her bed, fearing the worst. Very early the next morning, she rushed into Una's room. She was in a state of frenzy. I'll testify you in any court at any time, Mrs. Jeffers. Completely mystified, Una demanded to know what on earth Fi was talking about. Oh, I heard it all when Mr. Jeffers tried to kill you in the middle of the night. It was all poor Una could do to keep her face straight. Afterwards, when she told Robin, he was greatly amused. Dear gentle Robin, who wouldn't kill a pigeon. This is the poem that Robin was writing that night. The excesses of God. It is not by his high superfluousness we know our God, for the equal need is natural, animal, mineral. But to fling rainbows over the rain, and beauty above the moon, and secret rainbows of the domes of deep seashells, and make the necessary embrace of breeding beautiful also as fire. Not even the weeds to multiply without blossom, nor the birds without music. There is the great humaneness at heart of things, the extravagant kindness, the fountain humanity understands, and would flow likewise if power and desire were perchmates. Those were unforgettable evenings when Robin read aloud to us. There were only a few times that he ever read his own poems. He thought he read them very badly, but Una would stop her sewing and listen. She always sat in the same chair by the table in front of the fireplace with a green eye shade she always wore when sewing or making the little moccasins. Robin read often from Wordsworth and the Oxford Book of Verse, but I think the works of the Irish Renaissance pardon, were their great favorites at that period. Una loves Ireland and its poets passionately. There's probably no living person today who knows Yeats's work as Una does. I know that Robin has been deeply influenced by the Irish mystics. It is interesting to know that Una never advises. Well, something just fell. The hell fell? Oh no, that's a bad omen. You know what fell? The painting of Hawk Tower. It's a bad sign. The Jeffersons are haunting me. That's creepy. Right when I said the Irish mystics, they attacked me. It is interesting to know that Una never advises anyone how to live his life. She never criticizes. She feels this is too great a responsibility to undertake. If people have character and stability within themselves, they will go ahead in their own true life. If they don't, I don't want to be bothered with them. With all of her universal love of people subjectively, she has no sympathy with those of the dull eye and mind. She turns her back abruptly, decisively on anyone who bores her. She says, I am too impatient, but what a gift Lincoln Steffens had for encouraging people. It was his best contribution to life. He could discern the most hidden talent and adjure you to drag it out into the light. Robin and Una have a great love and understanding of dogs. Billy, their great English bull, was just another member of the Jeffers family. Una owned Billy long before she married Robin. He lived to be 14 years old. Some friends examining the log cabin one day asked me who B. Jeffers was. They had found the initials cut into one of the porch logs. Una J, RJ, and BJ. Those same initials are still there today, but poor Billy has long since died. After the twins were born, Billy included them in his small circle of devotion. His only way of expressing his fondness for Garth and Donnan was to knock them down clumsily, but effectively. This used to alarm Una. Hearing sudden squeals and howls from the next room, she would come flying to their rescue, and Billy would hurry to sit in his own chair when he heard her coming. Whenever we took the twins riding in their express wagon, Billy always came puffing along up the trails. Garth and Donnan loved these excursions as much as Billy did. They sat facing each other in the wagon and would laugh and gurgle at Billy's antics. Billy was a genius at discovering a cool spot ahead of us on some trail. He would confiscate it triumphantly and wait for us to catch up with him. Then, very pleased with himself, he never failed to move to one side, making room for all of us to rest. His favorite trip, the place Billy liked most to go, was over to the dairyman's at Del Monte, where Una went every day to get fresh milk for the boys. Billy would rush feverishly from one end of the rear seat of the car to the other, stampeding the twins in his rapid shiftings. The day Billy died, the house was plunged into mourning. Billy always kept guard while the youngsters slept, but this day he died while the boys were asleep. When they awoke, Una bundled them into the car before they missed him. Nearing the top of the hill on the way to the Monterey, Una and Robin heard the twins gurgling and talking their lingo together. Una turned and said, "What are you boys doing? What are you pointing at?" And they answered gleefully, "Billy is outside on the road running along and laughing at us." They were leaning over the side of the car, following with their eyes something invisible to their parents. Poor squat Billy, living, had never been able to run beside a car. Presently, Garth and Donnan began to play and wrestle, and Una said quietly, "Is Billy still laughing?" "No. Now Billy's away, their childish innocence undisturbed. Their childish inconsequence undisturbed." Una and Robin speak of this as their one authentic psychical experience. All the circumstances connected with the episode left no doubt in their minds that for a brief moment at least, death had not been able to tear the apparition of their dog away from them. After Billy died, Una didn't want another dog, but finally Mabel Luhan gave her an adorable puppy, a pedigreed English bulldog called Haig, and Una lost her heart to him at once. He was so like the other that people marveled because Billy never grew any older. In the market one day, an old resident of Carmel saw Haig patiently waiting for Una to finish her shopping. He came up and said, My, Mrs. Jeffers, the dog never changes, hasn't grown a day older in all these years. Haig is so very much like Billy. I spoke to Robin about it one day, wondering if they came from the same family. Robin said, No, it's just Una's tenderness. She makes boobies of all of her bulldogs, and perhaps her men, too. Haig lies before the fireplace, snorting and snoring in great contentment. His heavy breath jars the flames when he gets too close to the fire. Sometimes crackling bits will fly out, and Haig, terrified, jumps up, stares about wildly, then lies down again. As the fire turns to coals, Haig moves closer and closer until he is almost in the ashes. Una laughs as she watches this performance and says, Haig, and his wife. It is incredibly droll to see Robin standing anchored down by Haig at the end of his leash. Great, tall, silent Robin and squat, fat, noisy Haig. It is even funnier to watch Robin put Haig into his nightshirt when it's bedtime. This ridiculous garment is a faded, disreputable thing, vaguely resembling something that might have been once upon a time a knitted bathing suit or else a sweatshirt. Una spreads a special cover on the foot of her bed, and there Haig sleeps every night, Una serenely undisturbed by his snoring, which grows so noisy it almost drowns out the sound of the sea. Una said, Last night I woke up to see Robin slipping out of bed very quietly. I asked him where he was going, and he said, Haig pushed me out. I don't want to go, but what else can I do? Gracious, why didn't you put Haig out? I asked. I don't know. It just never occurred to me to do it, Robin said plaintively. That'll be all for today, bruv. As my nose is dripping and my soul is falling apart and the painting is off the wall. Goodbye.